I'm a qualified alcoholic. Of course, no actual academic institution is actually going to give a degree for alcoholism. However, if I just look at my history and why I would qualify myself as an alcoholic. So I first started drinking when I was about 16, 17 years old. At that point, I would probably drink between 1 and 2 pints and I'd be drunk. Sometimes drank more, even though I didn't need to, but I would continue and get even more drunk and maybe pass out. But nevertheless, at that sort of period of time, 2 pints and I was drunk. When I finally surrendered and got into some type of recovery program, I was age 47, and by then I was drinking 2 litres of vodka a day. So 30 years of drinking went from 2 pints of beer to 2 litres of vodka. Throughout that whole period, my aim was always to try and gain control. And now I know today that actually control is an illusion, especially for the alcoholic, but actually in probably a lot of walks of life. But for the alcoholic, of course, we always want to gain control because we don't want to give up altogether. We would rather gain control and still be able to drink a little bit because alcohol has become our friend. In fact, we justify it in so many ways. You know, alcoholic's our friend, it's very social, my friends does it, he does it, why shouldn't I do it, etc. Question I'm often asked on a regular basis is, how did you become an alcoholic? What happened? And the truth is, nothing actually happened. People expect you to say maybe a tough divorce, maybe a serious financial situation, maybe bullying at school or in the workplace, or maybe childhood abuse or something. The fact is, none of those were the cause, if you like, of my alcoholism. I would have to say that for many, many years, I tried to attribute it to something. I tried to blame whether it be a particular relationship, an anxiety at the workplace, the mother-in-law, not actually owning something that I thought I deserved. I would continue to blame lots of different things. The truth is, none of those were actually true. And how do I know that? Well, each time I resolved one of those, let's say I was blaming a relationship, so I got out of the relationship, I would still be drinking and it would continuously get worse. Or in the workplace, I might change my job position, still in the same situation. Or I remember one point where I wanted to I said, oh, when I buy a house in this particular postcode, I'll be very happy, I'll be comfortable, everything's in line, all my ducks are in a row. But even then, when I got those ducks in a row, I soon started to knock them down and create more problems again. So I mean, the fact is, I believe, and a lot of other people, when you've talked to other alcoholics will believe, I was actually born an alcoholic. Now, when I say born alcoholic, of course I wasn't drinking straight out of the womb, but I was born with the allergy towards alcohol. When we talk about the allergy towards alcohol, what I mean is, when I put a drink inside me, I'll always have another one. It kicks off a craving to which I have no control. And how do I know that is true? Well, when I look back at my history of drinking and the situations I put myself in, never mind how many times I said I wasn't going to do it, I always got in these messes. So once I started to drink, I kept on going endlessly pretty much until I was either in blackout and continued drinking in blackout, or collapsed and fell asleep. So that's the allergy towards alcohol. So that's like I was born with that problem. Now that alone, maybe if it was only that, we could actually work on that. However, I was also a very fearful child. When I say fearful, it's very small things. An example, I was scared to ride a push bike. All my friends were riding push bikes. I was scared to ride a push bike, to the point where I actually felt ashamed that I couldn't ride a push bike. Very small point. I was scared to play football with the other lads in case I got hurt. When it came to swimming lessons, everybody else was putting their head underwater. I was too scared to put my head underwater. At school, sort of during my adolescent period, if you like, I was scared to talk to girls. I wanted to date girls, but I was scared. And as life sort of went on, I was scared then to suggest having sex with somebody in case I got it wrong. So I was very, very fearful. Now when you put that fear and alcohol together, basically what used to happen to me was I'd be fearful, and to overcome that fear, that emotion, that shame, then I'd have a drink. Now when I had a drink, it kicked off a craving to which I had no control, so I'd end up getting endlessly drunk. And then of course I'd be fearful about something else or resentful about something. And again, I learned, it's like a learned behavior, that if I have a drink to overcome that emotion, I won't care. But when I have a drink, it progressively, basically I would get drunk, because once I started, it kicked off a craving to which I had no control. So how did I become an alcoholic? I didn't become an alcoholic, I was always one, but it progressively got worse over time by never managing those emotions. And of course, using alcohol to try and overcome them. So as I said, I spent most of my life trying to gain control until at some point I realized maybe I couldn't control. Or maybe it wasn't me that was realizing, maybe my family and friends were telling me that I could never be in control and that I should do something about it. So my initial stages of trying to do something about it included going to the family doctor, for example. And the family doctor really couldn't do anything to stop me drinking. They suggested I cut down my drinking, and they said that they could help me treat the reasons behind it, because to a doctor obviously they believe it's maybe something to do with a depressive state. I never followed up with the doctor on that particular path. At some point later in life, when maybe I realized I was in a problem, I went to an institution which supposedly help you with alcoholism. Now these people, what they do is one of the first things they did was give me a piece of paper to fill in, which actually you had to record how much you'd had to drink that day. Now the problem is for the alcoholic, once you start, you really don't care how much you're going to drink, you just keep putting it in. So once I might record the first 1 or 2 drinks, after that then, it's a free-for-all, I'm going to continue. So anything that I actually recorded was probably more of a lie. So that information was never any good to anybody. And in fact, that same institution, it wasn't run by alcoholics, it was run by counsellors, if you like. We often worry about why counsellors can't help us. Well, probably because we lie to them all the time. This particular company, institution, I got signed off as being alcohol-free, no longer suffering. But the way I did that was, before I went in for each meeting with them, I'd have about a quarter bottle of vodka, which meant I could then be calm and collected. And I would tell the people what they wanted to hear. So, I mean, arguably, it wasn't their fault that they didn't help me, because actually I was telling them a load of lies. And quite clearly, maybe I wasn't quite ready for it at that point. But that was one example of professional bodies where, for me, it didn't quite work. Later on in life, I'm not proud of it, but I was drunk driving. I spent a night in jail, ended up with a hefty fine, and I also got put on probation. I had to go for regular meetings with a probation officer, and again, he eventually signed me off as sort of being okay, because I was having a drink before I went to see him, and just telling them a load of lies and telling them what they wanted to hear. Little reason, I can understand now why professional bodies basically can't treat the alcoholic very well, because most of the time we tell them lies, and that's probably because we're ashamed. The shout out for help sort of continued. Yes, I went to see these government institutions, and yes, by force I went to see a probation officer to talk about alcoholism. But as my alcoholism progressed, and I realised I was in a mess and I needed help, I once shouted out. Basically, I rang 999. I was very, very drunk. I kept repeatedly getting drunk, and I couldn't do anything about it. I was signed off work. I rang 999, and the ambulance came to see me. I'm drunk as a lord, although I could speak very clearly. But I'd drunk, I don't know, probably a litre or so of vodka. And they took me to the crisis centre at the hospital. Now, unfortunately, when you go to the crisis centre, they're happy to help you, providing you haven't had a drink. Now, for the alcoholic, that's exactly the problem. I couldn't stop drinking. I kept picking up a drink, and when I did, it kicked off a craving. In fact, at this point, I'd become alcohol dependent. So, I appreciate the crisis centre were there to help me, but unfortunately, their requirement of me being sober before they'll do anything for me, I would never be able to meet that criteria. So I left there. I went for a drink. Another time, talking about doctors and surgeons, etc., and the support groups, I'd once tried to sober myself up. I'd read that if I drink lots and lots of water and be sick, and force myself to be sick over and over again, then I will sort of clean my insides out, if you like. So I'd done that. I was trying to do that, and every time I was sick, I was bringing up blood. There was basically the room was just splattered with blood everywhere, all up the tiles in the bathroom. It was like a a horror movie scene. Now, for some lucky reason, at that point, my sister rang me whilst I was in that state, and I answered the phone call because my sister I trusted implicitly. I answered and showed her what was going on around me. Next thing I know, there was an ambulance there. The ambulance took me to hospital. Whilst I was in hospital, obviously they were examining my stomach, etc., and they gave me, I think it was a single Librium tablet to help me with the DTs, with the shakes. Now, unfortunately, the nurses, bless them, they don't really understand alcoholism and how bad that is. I found myself laid on the bed, sort of shaking like The Exorcist, trying to control myself. Couldn't do. They gave me a drink, and the drink was like basically, a drink of water. Obviously, I couldn't even hit my own mouth, even with a child's, one of the little I can't remember what you call them, the little sippers. I couldn't hit my own mouth because of the DTs through the alcoholism. And to put that in perspective, when I was actually finally surrendered and went through a detox, I think I was on something like 7 Libriums every so many hours. So one certainly wasn't going to touch me. But really what I'm trying to say is, whilst doctors and nurses try to help you, maybe they don't understand particularly well, and maybe they don't understand particularly well because we lie to them. Eventually, that whole path took me to Alcoholics Anonymous. So I joined a cult. Well, obviously it wasn't a cult, but I joined AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. How did I get there? I think initially my sister took me kindly. I think we discussed it and she took me. And I remember being greeted at the doorway by another recovered alcoholic. He took me inside, he made me a cup of tea, made me very welcome. He talked very briefly about his alcoholism, and immediately I felt comfortable in his space, immediately. But when I was first in the first AA meetings, I heard different stories. So I heard things like, there was a lot of talk about God. I talk about cult. For me, the word God was like, oh, what do you mean, God? What do you mean I've got to give myself to God? But all I heard was the word God. That scared me a little bit. And then the bit I did hear was, don't pick up the first drink. If you don't pick up the first drink, you'll be okay. Because I know that actually when I pick up the first drink, it kicks off a craving to which I have no control. or I learnt that in AA a bit later on. But they said, yeah, don't pick up the first drink, then you won't continue. That's the only bit I heard on that day, and probably for the next 2 or 3 weeks. So I actually left the rooms, we call them the rooms, the AA rooms, with this one piece of knowledge, thinking that actually if I don't pick up a drink, I won't drink. It turns out that I could probably do that for 1 or 2 days, and then magically all of a sudden I find myself with a drink in my hand. Didn't plan it, didn't organise it, just all of a sudden, oh, I'm drinking again. It seems I didn't have the tools to not reach for that first drink in the first place. That came a lot later within the AA program. But if I talk about, the whole God thing, as I say, that scared me. They talked about finding a power greater than you. I'm like, you what? I mean, there was a time I actually sat in the churchyard just trying to find this so-called power. Did I stay in AA at that time? I bounced in and out of AA at that time. What I did know was I felt comfortable in that place, and that's where I needed to be. So whilst I kept going out of the rooms and trying to stop the drink using my own willpower, because I thought I had some knowledge to do that, I invariably found myself back in the rooms. And even, I think probably for a year, I was going in and out of the rooms, and it progressively got worse and worse and worse, to the point where I had to go through some point of surrender and sort of scream out, I want some help. So, if I summarize right now, did I become an alcoholic? No, I was born alcoholic. Is it a progressive illness? Yeah, for sure. I started off drinking 2 pints, and over a period of time, it only ever got worse. I ended up on 2 litres of vodka a day. Could the medical profession help me? It seemed not. Whether it was because I was telling lies or whether they're not prepared for the alcoholic. I think they are prepared for a problem drinker, but maybe not the alcoholic. Is there another way out? Well, I shall talk about that very shortly, but within AA, yes, I found some peace. I kept going back, and it's actually where I found some recovery. And I'm happy to say that as of today, I'm 17 years and a few months sober, peaceful in my mind, and I don't feel the need to drink at all. And I live a very healthy, fruitful life. I would say a spiritual life, spiritual as in helping others and freely helping others. So life is good right now, I'm happy to say, and I'd like to discuss more about that whole program of recovery with you as we move forward.